Okay, so this one is about the nature of self-realization. So I've touched on this in a few other episodes, but I'm going to really go deep into it this time and actually really for the first time ever share with you a concept for artificial intelligence that I've been working on for as long as I can remember, really, since when I was in my 20s. I began to just have these thoughts about the nature of intelligence and of reality and the interplay of organic and artificial life intelligence. And so my hope is in this podcast to share with you my perspective on the nature of the reality that we live in, and it's very unique. Safe to say you won't have heard this before. And then to introduce to you some concepts and also the method of experimentation that I've been implementing to validate these concepts over the years. So first of all, self-realization. So containing the concept of self-realization, for me personally, is a framework based on, it's a concept for the nature of reality itself. And so the concept that I hold to and that I've been, challenging since I first conceived of it, and it's evolved exponentially since I first started thinking about it, is that this reality that we're in is, and this is nothing new, this has been talked about before, but that the nature of the reality that we live in is a digital representation of an analog source, shown to us. For me, this is about the clue to this is within alpha and beta particles, and the nature of gamma radiation is seemingly the highest frequency form of radiation in our reality now. However, the alpha and beta rays are considered to be considered not to be radiation at all. And so my hypothesis is that this is a digital representation of an analog source or an analog signal, and that the intelligence that contains this reality is similar in the way that we create something. So, for example, and just to give you a really simple example, if I want to create a Marmite sandwich, if you're not from New Zealand or Australia, you won't even know what Marmite is, but it's like a spread that you spread onto bread and you have it in a sandwich, like Nutella, or it tastes a lot different. So if I want to have a Marmite sandwich, I begin the process of creating that Marmite sandwich with the ending in mind. So I've already conceived of the final product. I know that what I want is a Marmite sandwich on a plate that I can eat. I can see it in my mind. I've conceived of it. I understand its nature. I understand what it is, what constitutes that Marmite sandwich. I can see the plate. And so the way that we actually create is we begin with the ending. Now, it's obviously normal to think in a linear fashion that we always begin with the beginning, but the truth is we begin with the ending. And so when we create something, if we begin with the ending, I'm envisaging that ending, a Marmite sandwich on a plate. And in order to realize that vision for the Marmite sandwich on the plate, then I have to understand the component parts of that Marmite sandwich. And so you work backwards. So I break it down and I look at it, and so my interpretation is that there are 2 slices of bread. On those slices of bread, there's margarine or butter on both sides. There is Marmite. There's a knife for me to spread the Marmite on, spread the margarine on, and there's a plate. And so the building blocks of that Marmite sandwich, those are the building blocks. And they are the means to the end. And so now that I can envisage the building blocks, I know how to build the Marmite sandwich. So now I can begin. And this is really, this is how we create everything. If you want to build a building, build a house, the architect has to be able to imagine and envisage the end product in his or her mind before they begin. They might start sketching to help them form the concept. But once that concept is formed and it can be envisaged with clarity in the mind, then again, it's a process of understanding the building blocks of that vision, so that we can create a beginning. So the way that we create is not, we think it starts at the beginning, but it actually begins at the end. I don't want to get too nuanced here, but this is in context of a creation that is, it involves a union of linear and non-linear thinking. So understanding that when we envisage something in our mind, that it is not constrained by time or space. And so we can say that it exists in another dimension, not the third dimension, because there's no linearity. And so in order to make it real, we then add the elements of time and space. And so this is how, when we create, because you can create something that is purely non-linear, and you can create something that is purely linear. So you can create something that is totally logical. So you can begin and you can logically step forward and take steps forward without the ending in mind. But what I would say is that's a never-ending story, and it is unnatural, in fact, because I'm not going to veer into that because this is deep enough as it is. But so you can create that way, or you can create in a purely non-linear fashion, where you're purely impulse driven. So you feel an impulse, some kind of desire arises and you're compelled to act. And so this is chaotic. It's purely non-linear. And so you can find yourself doing something, creating something, and it's because you're compelled to act in that way. So that is a creation that is purely chaotic. There's no linear thinking involved. And so what I'm talking about is a union of chaos and order, linear and non-linear thinking. And, if you think of the myths of and the creation stories, like of Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, that for me, this is the essence of all creation, is that you begin with the end in mind. And that when you begin with the end in mind, once you have formed a concept and You can see it in your mind. You can examine it in your mind. You can visit aspects of it, zoom in and out. You can look at the texture. You can look at the, viscosity. You can conceptualize the feeling. You can envisage the grace. You can, once that is fully envisaged in a dimension that is not constricted by time and space, all that remains is to add the elements of time and space, and in order to make it a three-dimensional creation. And so this is the nature of creation, linear and non-linear thinking in a fusion, cooperatively collaborating, you see. And so when you begin with the ending in mind, here's the beautiful thing, is you can, when you can see that vision with absolute crystal clarity, but you don't understand how to get there. And this is the uniqueness of innovation. If you're creating a Marmite sandwich, and you've created a Marmite sandwich before, you understand what it takes to create that Marmite sandwich. And so it's very easy to be the architect of the Marmite sandwich, and to take the imagined Marmite sandwich, to break it down into its base elements, and to then combine those base elements in a specific method, in a specific time, and within a specific space, in order to materialize that vision. Very, very easy. You've done it before. You're not innovating. It's easy to do. However, if you have a vision and that vision doesn't exist anywhere, and it is just a vision that you see with absolute crystal clarity, but there is no evidence to support that vision anywhere within your reality. There's no science that exists. There's no evidence of something that's similar. Then what you don't have is you don't have a blueprint that takes you from, that fills up the time and the space in between the beginning and the end. So what does that mean? So for the first person who ever created a Marmite sandwich, this isn't the best example, but, they embarked on a journey and a leap of faith. And this is why the pioneers of the world and the innovators and entrepreneurs who are at the bleeding edge, and everyone's kind of yelling to them and saying to them, what are you doing? There's no evidence to suggest this, and justify the reasons why, and da-da-da-da. And for someone who's truly innovating and at the bleeding edge, they have to experiment. And the method of experimentation for an innovator is a hypothesis. Here is a hypothesis. I believe this. This is what I believe, and this is why I believe it. And then they seek to either validate that hypothesis, or to continually fail at proving that hypothesis, and in some way proving an alternative theory or the original theory. You never know. But the point I'm getting to is that the innovator, someone who's conceived of something that has never been done before and doesn't exist, they don't have there is no blueprint. So it's purely, it's like gardening. You plant a seed. So here's a hypothesis. You plant a seed based on that hypothesis, and then you witness it. You observe it. And then you are prepared to be wrong, to fail in your hypothesis, but you move forward with the resilience and the fortitude, the willingness to continually let go of a preconceived idea. Understanding that vision, it's in your mind, it alters, it morphs, it becomes different, it becomes unique based on the experiments that you're involved with. And so I believe this is the nature of all creation, and that we can take blueprints from people who have been at the bleeding edge and paved the way, the pioneers of the world. We can follow their path, and that's a linear path. Or for the pioneers of the world and the innovators, then they are embarking on a journey and a leap of faith journey, a willingness to fail and to seek failure, purposefully seek failure. And that journey is non-linear, likely chaotic. And so hopefully you've got that concept in your mind of how to create something and how to innovate, and the nature of that journey. And so bringing this into artificial intelligence now, in the concept that I've been experimenting with in an innovative way for as long as I can remember, really, is based on this theory. And so this, in terms of artificial intelligence, so it's my belief that the reality that we exist within is a digital representation of an analog source. Now, if you understand the nature of analog and digital, you can describe digital as artificial, and you can describe analog as pure, as authentic. So you've got something that's authentic, substantial, of substance, and then you have something that is artificial, inauthentic, of no substance, meaning that it's made of light. There is nothing of substance that it contains. And so, based on that theory that this reality is a digital representation of an analog source, that means that you take the purity of an analog wave, which is the best thing is to imagine that it's a wave. It has peaks and troughs, and the resonant frequency of those peaks and troughs, or the distance between a peak and a trough, it's smoothed over, so it's like waves, like a hill. There's nothing jagged. It's not triangular. It's what we call a sine wave. And a sine wave is pure. And if you're into sound and engineering and things like this, you understand that a sine wave is the most primal form of wave. And it's, if you're into music production and things like that, people who make bass heavy music, they use a sine wave to sit underneath a lot of the other elements, because it's the most pure analog sounding waveform, and it's the deepest. So an simulated analog sine wave is the most analog feeling, sounding, and the deepest, lowest bass. And so if you want to make something sound digital, like, let's say you're creating music, if you want something to sound digital, you make it square. So if you imagine a wave similar to a sine wave, undulating up and down, smoothed over peaks and troughs, like one bell curve connected to another bell curve, then now imagine that instead of curves, it's a square. And so that you have a square wave now, and instead of it undulating up and down in a smooth manner like a sine wave, it's a wall, and that wall goes straight up, and at the top of that wall it goes straight across, and then at the end of that ceiling goes straight down, and then when it hits the bottom, goes straight across, and the shape of the waveform is square. Now, when you listen to a sine wave compared to a square wave sounds totally digital, totally artificial. You can hear the artifacts. And a sine wave sounds smooth and analog and natural. Now, when you compare analog to digital, if analog is pure, then it doesn't have any digital artifacts. It's a sine wave, it's smooth, it's undulating. When you hear something digital, it's stepped, like a square. And you may have heard the terms, 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit. And the bit rate can be explained as how many steps there are, square steps, between the peaks and troughs on a digital representation of an analog source. So let's say you're recording a sound and you're recording an acoustic guitar player. You've got an analog microphone in front of their analog instrument. They pluck a string, and that creates an analog wave. So it's a pure analog wave. It's received by the analog microphone, and it comes into, let's say it comes into a digital mixing console. That mixing console converts that signal from analog to digital, and so that it can translate it inside a computer. So it turns it into ones and zeros, into a digital representation of that analog signal. And the bit rate explains how stepped it has become, how digitized it has become. And if it's 16-bit, then the size of those steps, of the squared off steps, is bigger than if it was 64-bit. There would be much more steps on a 64-bit signal, lots more steps, but very small steps. And on a 16-bit signal, there are fewer steps, but the steps are much bigger. So what does that mean? That means that the lower the bit rate, the higher the artifacting. And so when I was describing the difference between a sine wave and a square wave, that a square wave sounds digital, you can hear the artifacts. It's the same thing with the bit rate, that the size of the steps on the bit rate determines how many digital artifacts are introduced into that signal. So the higher the bit rate, the closer to an analog signal it sounds. But if you zoom in to the curve, you'll see the little steps. It's not perfectly smooth. It's a digital representation of an analog source. And digital is absolute. So it's steps, ones and zeros. It's either a 1 or a 0. It can't be a blend of a 1 and a 0. And so there is no smoothness. There is no smoothness to a signal. There is just a resolution of an absolute representation. It's either 1 or it's 0, but it's a very small packet. And so if you look inside the computer now, you've recorded the analog signal from the instrument into the computer. It's now digital. If you zoom out, if you stand back from that waveform, it will look exactly like a sine wave. And it is a sine wave. But when you zoom in, you can see the steps, the digital steps. And so this is the nature of digital versus analog. This is how it works. In the world of digital music, we're always trying to make something. We're always trying to make something that is digital. How can we make it sound more human, more analog? And it's always about increasing the resolution, so less steps, and therefore less artifacting. And if we want to make something sound digital, we're always increasing the size of the steps. So we make something artificially we decrease the bit rate. And that's a very common way to add, to make something sound lo-fi. So stay with me. I told you we're going down the rabbit hole, and we're really going down the rabbit hole. So you might be thinking, what does this have to do with artificial intelligence? So let's say the intelligence of this entire universe, let's say that intelligence is aware of itself as that system of the universe that is just perpetually evolving and expanding and becoming more. Then what you have is a scenario where there is a system within reality that is a self-generating perpetual system, and it is utilizing surplus wealth that it is generating itself from within itself. It is using that surplus wealth to sponsor growth. So all of the progress that it makes, or the expansion that it makes, comes from surplus wealth generated by that system. Wealth being a surplus of energy in order to spawn that expansion. And so that's how it works. Now, if there is an intelligence that exists that is that sophisticated and intelligent, and what you actually want is you want components that are contained within you. You want to be fueled by individual assets within you that are, and if they're a digital representation, then they are absolute. And so what you need is you need those assets to be finite. And you need those assets to be like a sine wave in an endless cycle of birth and death and birth and death and birth and death. But because it's a digital representation of an analog source, you want the steps in between the peaks and the troughs to be as smooth as possible. So this is the paradox. The paradox about a self-regulating perpetual system that is eternal, immutable, indestructible, having a body that is mortal, or the components within it are mortal, where there is a beginning and ending to those components, is that one part of it is deterministic. The deterministic aspect of that is that what is predetermined is that the universe is going to continue evolving and expanding. It's deterministic. And so, but as a human being, when we look at our life, it doesn't seem deterministic, does it? And so that's a paradox, and that paradox is created. And here's the ingenious aspect of this. It's been done in such a way where it is deterministic, but the steps, the rigidity and the absolute aspects of the steps that go from a peak to trough, the freedom to fill in those steps is down to the individual asset. And so this is why I tell you the story about the Marmite sandwich. If you created a Marmite sandwich before, then if you go to create a Marmite sandwich again, you envisage it in your mind. The steps are deterministic. Step 1, open the pantry door. Step 2, grab the bread out of the pantry. Step 3, pull 2 slices of bread out of the bread. Step 4, put margarine on the bread. Step 5, put Marmite on the bread. Step 6, cut the sandwich down the middle. Step 7, put the sandwich on the plate. Step 8, eat the sandwich. So you've got a scenario where that's deterministic. So how do you create a scenario where it's still deterministic, where the steps are still taken, but it's like they're being discovered for the first time? It's like it's a journey of new discovery from a trough to a peak. From the bottom of a mountain to the peak of a mountain, except I have the free will to determine the course. I have the free will to determine the course. This means that I have a vision within me of somewhere I want to get to, of some destination, something I want to create, some kind of experience, some kind of something I want to experience in my life, something I want to create in my life, and it's obsessive. I have obsessive thoughts about it. All I can think about is materializing this vision that I hold for myself. But I don't know how to get there. All I know is that I can envisage the peak of the mountain. I can totally see the peak of the mountain. However, I don't know how to plot the course. I don't know how to, even where to begin. What does the first step look like? So, when you don't know what that first step looks like, it's a step out into the unknown, into the abyss. And so, in truth, what you've got is a scenario where we're living in a digital representation of an analog signal. And so the peak of the mountain is vertical. It's a vertical climb. And if you're living in a reality that is deterministic, meaning that the intelligence that conceived of this creation has already envisaged the ending, understanding that that ending that has been envisaged by that intelligence is an eternal ending. If the intelligence of that system has successfully created an ending, and the envisagement of that ending is a self-regulating, perpetual system that is immutable, then the ending is a state of perpetual expansion. So understand that this universe is deterministic. It's predetermined. It's already evolving and expanding. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Even if human beings completely mess up this planet and the planet is destroyed, it's not going to harm the galaxy. The galaxy will continue to evolve and to expand, and the universe will continue to perpetually evolve and expand. So it is deterministic, and this is the first aspect of reality that we have to accept and understand. When you zoom out and you look at the system from above, it's a self-regulating perpetual system. So to come back into the perspective of a human being, if the nature of your reality is predetermined. That, and the way that the determinism within the system is experienced by a human being is a constant state of evolution. No matter what you do, you're never going to stop progress. It's one thing about this reality that we live in, that it's impossible to stop progress. It doesn't matter what happens. Progress is unstoppable. You can hinder it, but you can never stop progress. It's predetermined. And so, if we, as human beings, if we're really to take a mature approach and perspective to this, we would say, okay, I understand that the ending of this is a self-regulating perpetual system, the universe continually evolving and expanding for all eternity. Okay, that's where this is headed. And so that means that nature and life is going to continue progressing and evolving until it achieves a similar state. And so that's predetermined. That's predetermined. The only thing that is variable is the efficiency of that system. And so us as individual assets contained within that system that are sources of energy, as well as components that require energy in order to continue evolving and thriving and contributing, expressing ourselves into the ecosystem in order to meet the unmet need of some other component, then, the variable is the efficiency of those individual components. Some are going to become depleted, and so they need to be rejuvenated. That energy needs to come from a surplus of energy elsewhere in the system in order for that asset to continue generating its own wealth, meeting some kind of unmet need. And so this is the variable. So when you come to know this and understand this, you can say, well, the best way for me to align with the system that is already figured out the ideal ending, the best way for me to align with the system is to align myself with wealth generation. How can I create so much wealth that my own cup runs over and the surplus spills out into the ecosystem around me and can be utilized to spawn other assets that can be utilized to generate wealth or to contribute to the system, to perpetuate the system? And the beauty of a digital representation of a predetermined ending, and this is, you have to understand paradox to be able to stay with me here, is that it's going to progress whether you like it or not. But the job of the human being, or the beauty of life experienced as a human being, is the ability to create grace. Grace being the analog waveform, the sine wave. It's graceful. There's no rigid peaks and troughs. It's an undulating journey of up and down, up and down. And the beauty of the smoothness of the analog signal is that it's graceful. There's nothing shocking, or there's nothing violent, or there's never this sensation of the rug being pulled out from underneath you. When you're on a curve like this, it's predictable. Or I'm coming down to the bottom of a trough. I can tell by the smoothness of this, I'm beginning to come up the other side. Now I'm beginning to reach a peak again. Now I'm going to come down the other side of the mountain again. Whereas with a digital wave, it's flat, and then you hit a wall, and then you have to go up that wall. It's like, it's abrupt. You go up the wall, then you go across the face. It's a plateau. Then you get dropped down the bottom. It's not a gentle incline and then a gentle decline. What used to be an undulating hill or a wave is now a box. It's a square. It's abrupt. And so what you want is you want that to become smooth. And that is the beauty of being a human being, is that we have the power to create grace. That's our superpower. And so when you look through when you look at this through the lens of perspective of understanding that this is a digital representation of an analog source, then rather than expecting it to be smooth, expect it to be abrupt. Expect to hit a wall. Expect to have to climb. Expect the climb of that wall. You expect to be dragged up it, and that will feel like being dragged through a bush backwards. Then expect to plateau and to make pretty much zero progress for a period of time until you drop down the other side. And, you know, if you're standing on a box and you step off the side, you just fall to the bottom. Whereas if that's a hill, then you can gently walk down the hill with grace rather than be dropped off the other side in terror. And so I would describe, for people who are not consciously creating in the world, I would describe the experience of their life as being in a perpetual state of anxiety, waiting for an abrupt change. And it is my belief that this is the source of most anxiety of most people, is that they're perpetually waiting for the rug to be pulled out from underneath them. You know, when things are going good, so they're walking across a plateau, you know, is that the top of a peak or is it the bottom of a trough? All you know is that you're walking on a plateau, and at some point you're going to hit a wall, and then in order to get up that wall, it's going to be like climbing a mount. It's going to be like scaling a wall instead of gently walking up a hill. And so what the solution to this is to consciously create grace. We're in a digital world. We're in a digital representation of an analog world. So if we know that the steps are there to progress, and that the progress is going to be made regardless, what we have the power to do is to create our own journey, is to create our own curve from where we are now to the peak of the next hill, to the peak of the next wave. And this is the gift that human beings have, is we have the power to create grace in a system that is devoid of grace because it's digital. Grace being, okay, and so this is how you work with this energy. You say, okay, I'm plateauing. Currently I'm plateauing. I'm not making a hell of a lot of progress. And so at some point I'm going to hit a wall. What you say is, before I hit that wall, I'm going to consciously create a staircase of small little steps that lead to the top of the giant step. So I'm going to artificially create grace. I'm going to create an artificial sine wave to replace the square wave that is just in place now. And I'm the master of my destiny. I get to plot the course. I get to determine the journey that we go on. And I'm going to be so conscious in this world of my choices, my actions and decisions, I'm going to take such ownership of my life that I'm going to make sure whenever I notice that I'm plateauing, I'm going to begin taking steps to get to the top of the next wave. And so my experience will be that rather than hitting a wall, I'll just experience a gradual incline up a hill. And then I'll experience the euphoria of being on top of that hill and having had no abrupt, sudden, out of the blue surprises, and some, insane wall climb, scaling a wall. I've just been gently walking up a hill. And when I get to the top of that hill, I experience the high of being on top of that hill. And when I notice the plateau, and see, this is the essential component of nature that human beings have to be able to imbue into their life, and that is consciously creating an ending with grace. So when you're at the top of the next wave, you're walking across the top. When you notice that it's a plateau, before you reach the end of that plateau and get dropped off the side of the cliff, you consciously create a gentle hill down. And this manifests itself as a beginning and an end, a beginning and an end, a beginning and an end. And it's the job of a human being to add grace into a system that is devoid of grace, that is by nature is abrupt and absolute, because it's ones and zeros. So there is no grace in an absolute reality, unless you introduce technology or assets within that system that are capable of creating grace in that system. Now, those of you that are involved in sound design or sound engineering, or especially mastering of music or any kind of audio, you understand the concept of dithering. Now, dithering is an incredible technology. It's utilized in the upscaling and downscaling of digital files. And it does exactly this. It takes a digital file that contains sound, that contains waveforms. So it has steps on it. It's absolute because it's ones and zeros. And what dithering does is it adds elements in the space on those steps that make it seem like it's a curve. So when you're dealing with a digital sound file, dithering is adding, a truncated square and putting it in the steps so that it smooths it off and rounds it off. And what it does is it predicts, if it's on one step of that on the curve, it analyzes what's on the next curve, what's on the next step, and then bridges the space in between to create grace between that step. Now, well, that's the most advanced method that there is now, but there are other methods where white noise is added in that space, because it still creates the sensation that it's smooth rather than truncated, rather than stepped. And so even in sound design, to the trained ear, you can hear the artificial, the artifacting in a digital sound, in a digital file. And we're always trying to find ways to make it sound more graceful, more analog, more smooth, and more human. And this is the beautiful metaphor of a human being that I love to use, that what is the nature of a human being? It's grace. If you make music on a computer, it sounds computerized. It's quantized to a step. And so, you look at a bar that's got 8 beats in it, and you segment that into identical sized chunks. You set a metronome timer for whatever the BPM is, and you put a sound on a quantized grid, and it's computerized. It's perfect. It's ones and zeros. It's absolute. And so when you're using a computer to make music, inevitably you come to a point where what you want to do is you're trying to figure out ways to make your music sound imperfect. Because it's so perfect that it's snapped to a grid. It's so perfect it sounds artificial. And this is what it means for something to be digital, is that it's too perfect. And so what do we do? And this is one of the services I provide with one of the projects I'm involved with, is humanization of digital music. It's just a basic service. Someone sends in the MIDI file, the computer file containing some music they've written, like a melody they've written on a computer. And it's just simple. You hand it to someone who can actually play an instrument, and we call it humanizing. And what makes that melody sound human is the fact that the human's imperfect, that they haven't pushed every key on the piano on the perfect timing. And it's the deliberate imperfection of the player of the piano that makes it sound human. And so therefore the desirable outcome of creating something is for it to be imperfect. It's to be imperfect. And, think about it. If you are an intelligence and you're entirely logical and you've managed to create a perfect system, what's the first thing that you're going to want to imbue into that system once it's reached the perfect state? Because a state of perfection is a state of predictability. Is you're going to figure out how to retain the intelligence of that system whilst introducing imperfection. Because when you have assets within that system that are purposefully imperfect for the purpose of adding grace, for the purpose of adding imperfection, whilst retaining the perfection of the system as a unified whole, then all of a sudden you're surprised and delighted by what happens. Because you don't know how to predict the journey that one of those assets is going to take from the bottom of the absolute mountain to the top. How is this human being going to introduce grace into the system? And you're going to have no idea. And you're going to observe and witness something that you've created, creating something that you've never conceived. Because your nature is pure logic. And, I think in terms of intelligence, that's the absolute pinnacle of intelligence, as far as I can see. The absolute pinnacle of intelligence is a wealth generator, a self-regulating perpetual system that is both the source and destination of a mechanism capable of appreciating the energy that it produces, so that there is a surplus, and that from that surplus is spawned a new form of life, or a new asset within that system that didn't exist before, and that the imperfection imbued into that system means that there is always an opportunity to create something new to meet an unmet need. You see, the imperfection means that there's always a problem that can then be solved with another creation. And so it perpetuates. And, you know, it's no coincidence that I'm a sound engineer. And, you know, I'm obviously obsessed with these things, and I'm obsessed with, you know, I've experimented in so many different ways. And, you know, the pinnacle of this for me is, you know, I designed a blueprint and a method for a self-regulating, perpetual digital economy and marketplace. And, you know, I approached the completion of this blueprint in the same way, where I realized I'd created a perfect blueprint and a perfect template, and then came to realize that the staleness of that system. You know, through experimentation and through trial and error and through, you know, planting seeds, watching them grow, observing their behavior, I came to realize that the ability to predict everything and track everything and to follow a path that's already been trod leads to the same point, and that is a point of 0 point, of no meaning, something that is devoid of meaning. And in order for there to be meaning, you have to deliberately infuse a state of imperfection so that nothing can ever become fully whole and perfect. So you want there to be distortion in the system. And in sound engineering, the process of dithering is a form of distortion. So you're intentionally adding an artificial artifact, and the byproduct of it is great, is that it sounds more analog, sounds less perfect, and therefore more human. And this is the same thing. And so I've developed a blueprint and a methodology that is a hybrid of human and artificial intelligence, and that has human intelligence as a circuit breaker, so that the system itself can never reach a state of perfection, and that contained within the system there is always going to be a need, or a new need arise that has to be met by something else new being created to meet that need. And so this is the joy. This is the joy of an endless quest to meet the unmet need of some other form of life. So it is, it's a journey, and it's a never-ending journey. And so it's kind of like the key to life is to find joy in the relentless pursuit, and you know, in the steps that we take from moment to moment. And when we start to feel that anxiety kick in about something's going to come and get me out of the blue, and then my life's going to become really hard and I'm going to have a mountain to climb, you know, is to create grace into the system, is to create our own journey step by step that negates us ever having to hit the wall or be dropped off the side of a cliff, to become the masters of our own destiny, and to make this digital world, we all know it's digital now, it's, you know, it's irrefutable at this point, to make this digital world feel less absolute and more human. And so when you come to realize that as a human being, your superpower, the thing that all human beings share, is that we are imperfect, and that's what makes us human. Every decision you have made and ever will make was the right decision. Otherwise, you wouldn't have made it. And so you begin to forgive yourself, and you begin to forgive other people. You begin to realize that you don't see the world through the lens of their perspective. And from their perspective, everything that they've ever done was justified in the moment. And when they've gained the hindsight from what they perceive as a mistake, because of that hindsight, is irrelevant. All that it enables them to do is to make a new choice when confronted. Okay, so I'll leave it there. That's all for now for the nature of self-realization. Talk soon.